My name's Chad Mangan. From the Sealy's Bay area, about an hour and a half sort of southwest of here. Work for a company called NutriAg. We're a fertilizer, or I call us a crop nutrition company. We manufacture products in Toronto, ship all over the world. So we deal with every crop imaginable, essentially. We also do a lot of work with tissue sampling as well. So they wanted me to talk a little bit about stress, how we mitigate stress, and sort of some of the work we've done with tissue sampling on how we can do that. So anybody under stress ever? Stress is pretty common, eh? Yeah, I have 2 kids. I have a 3-year-old son. I was just telling Aaron he's a bit of a nut job, and he creates a lot of stress with my wife and I. So anybody heard of reactive oxygen species in the past? Anybody heard of that? Free radicals, you guys heard of that at all? Probably heard of free radicals, right? Usually has a bit of a negative connotation. So free radicals, essentially you think of like oxygen. It's basically an O2 negative. It's an oxygen atom that has one or more sort of unpaired electron, and it's constantly trying to pair up. And by doing that, it's causing cellular damage, right? These are formed all the time. They're naturally formed compounds by plants. They're formed during respiration, photosynthesis, right? All the natural processes. If we have a little bit of them, that's fine. There can be good things about them. They can be a signaling molecule, which can tell, say, that the top part of the plant wants the rooting system to put more roots out because it needs more fertility to fill pods of soybeans, for instance. If we have too many of these reactive oxygen species, like down here, and we don't have enough things to fight them off, antioxidants, which you've all heard of, right? We can have adverse conditions. We can have damage. They can cause damage in proteins, amino acids, fats, lipids, DNA, pretty much anything in a plant. In humans, I have, probably partly being a parent, I have crow's feet, gray hair. You know, I'm getting older, a little more wrinkly. Free radicals cause that. Free radicals can cause degenerative diseases like Parkinson's. They can cause central nervous system disorders like Alzheimer's. They can cause cancer, diabetes, vision loss with your cataracts. They can cause all sorts of problems in humans. They also cause a lot of issues in crops, right? So what causes them? Right here, I don't know if you can read that. How much rain have we had this year, right? Probably over 25 inches in some areas. Excessive rain. I call it, I'm a nutrient geek. I call it oxygen deficiency when we got, standing water out there. But too much rain, drought, high heat. If we have, hailstorm, late frost, nutrient imbalance, right? Maybe we just are really low on boron or really low on manganese. That can cause more reactive oxygen species to happen in a plant. So we need things like antioxidants to basically, what they do, they donate an electron to a free radical to basically neutralize it and sacrifice itself so that it doesn't cause more damage within a cell. So, antioxidants, they scavenge reactive oxygen species, okay? Lots of different antioxidants out there, right? We all take antioxidants. Anybody take vitamin C? That's basically why do you take vitamin C? Anybody know? Because your wife or husband told you to? Yeah, right. That came up in the last chat because my wife tells me to. So vitamin C is basically boosting our immune system, right? It's essentially acting as an antioxidant to fight off reactive oxygen species. So these enzymes, there's one that's really important in plants called superoxide dismutase right here, SOD. If you Google it, if you're really dorky and if you're really bored tonight, Google superoxide dismutase. It's really interesting to read about it. They're basically donating electrons to fight off these reactive oxygen species. But more importantly, for them to function properly, they need a lot of micronutrients, especially manganese. Manganese is very, very, very important for superoxide dismutase. There's a couple other important ones here, glutathione peroxidase and catalase. Zinc and iron are more important in them, but they all basically do the same thing. They're all enzymes. If I actually simplify it a little more, I used this example earlier. Anybody drink beer? How do we make beer? What were you gonna say? Sometimes?
Come up with a joke fast enough.
Yeah. So how do we make beer, right? We have starch in malt barley or corn. That starch needs to be broken down or hydrolyzed and made into simple sugars. How does that happen? We need an enzyme. We use amylase, is a very important enzyme if you like to drink beer. It will break that down into a simple sugar, and then we have the yeast bacteria, right, that feed off that, and then we make ethanol alcohol. So amylase is a very important enzyme for those of us who drink alcohol. So in the plants, though, they perform all these, detoxification of ROS in the plant. We also have, I mentioned vitamins like vitamin C, vitamin A, right? Carotenoids, so like your beta carotene or alpha carotene, that would be like your pigments. You've probably all heard of that, like in a carrot or a beet, like the color, that comes from like your carotenoids. They help make chlorophyll, right, which we need for photosynthesis in plants. In humans, beta carotene will actually convert to vitamin A, which we need for eyesight, right? So they've got a lot of antioxidant capacity in a plant. Flavonoids, I always think of like bioflavonoids. They come from like citrus skin, right? We always hear about these bioflavonoids. They also have like anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial capacities. So these are all different types of antioxidants to fight reactive oxygen species. Okay, so I'm a nutrient guy, so I'm going to talk about a couple nutrients. I'm going to talk about manganese first. It's probably one of my most favorite nutrients, probably because of my last name and because I'm small and it's a micronutrient. We don't need a lot of it, but it plays very important roles in the plant. That's my stupid joke I always tell. So not only is it very involved with helping with enzymatic activity and fighting ROS, manganese plays a lot of other really cool roles in the plant. It is the starting point of photosynthesis. It breaks the H2O water molecule. It helps with chlorophyll production, which is obviously the pigment needed for photosynthesis. It helps with lignification of the cuticles of the plant, which can help with, pathogen entry, preventing things from coming in. They've done work in the UK showing the internal temperature of plants. They use infrared thermal sensing to measure how hot or cold a plant is inside. They've actually proved in wheat that if we have adequate levels of manganese, it keeps the plants cooler during the heat of the summer, right? So there's some cool things going on there with stress mitigation. Also, this is a really cool sort of an interactive chart I show on my computer. I can't do it here. But through a lot of the work we've done with tissue sampling, identifying where we need manganese, and then doing foliar applications of manganese on crops like potatoes and row crops, we've been able to prove that, the bottom lines are concentrations or how much of that nutrient is in the leaf. The one up there is your yield. We've been able to prove that if we can increase manganese levels in a plant, we can actually have the same yield outcome with less NP and K. And why that is, manganese is directly involved with these macronutrient sort of metabolism and utilization functions. So I was talking about this earlier, but you think of soybeans, okay? Anybody spreading 200 pounds of nitrogen on their soybeans ahead of planting? Maybe some people are, but as a general rule, we don't bulk spread urea on soybeans. Why not? Anybody know why we don't put nitrogen on soybeans? They need a lot of nitrogen. What's that? That's right. So we have these things called rhizobia, right, in the soil. They're taking what we're breathing in, nitrogen gas, they're fixing it, putting it into an ammonia form in those nodules, and then it's getting assimilated and moved up the plant to be turned into proteins and vitamins and other things, right? Without manganese, that nitrogen does not move from the nodules up the plant. There's these long distance transport molecules of nitrogen called ureides. You can Google them if you want. They are directly, their function is directly related to manganese levels. So if we are very low in manganese in a legume like alfalfa or soybeans, we can get buildup of nitrogen in the nodules to the point where we won't have more fixation, or it can actually come from the top of the plant back down into the nodules and get stuck there. So that's why crops like soybeans, when we see that deficiency, right, Mike, and we spray a manganese sulfate or a chelated manganese, we can see a big response with that nutrient because we can get that nitrogen cycle moving again, right? So kind of further to that, I talked about manganese. Another important one with stress mitigation is zinc. When do we put zinc on in corn usually? Mike, when do we apply zinc? Starter, right? Which is good. Why do we put it on with starter? We need it. We need zinc early on to sort of, moderate or regulate the auxin levels in those little roots that are coming out, right? So auxins are plant growth hormones that are found in the shoot tips and the root, shoot tips and the root tips that are basically responsible for pushing out your lateral roots and your apical meristem. So we need zinc to basically, for those auxins to perform appropriately. But zinc is one we look at a lot on tissue levels later in the season on corn. Why? Because we need a lot of zinc now, okay? A lot of the work that I give credit to Greg Stewart, Tony Vine, a lot of these guys have done a lot of work on late season nitrogen, phosphorus, and zinc to build, say, kernel mass or just to fill the fourth quarter of grain production in corn. So we need zinc later. It helps with seed set, and it's directly related to maintaining the starch and the protein in the grain. So phosphorus, 80% of the phosphorus taken in by corn is removed in the grain, right? So almost everything, all the phosphorus is in grain. Nitrogen is second. 60% of the nitrogen that comes in is removed by the grain, and 60% of the zinc taken up is removed by the grain. Most of the other nutrients are well below that. So we know that, and that's some work that Tony Vine's done and some other extension people in the US, but they've proven that those three nutrients are what we need for grain corn. So zinc is a nutrient we gotta watch through the season of corn to make sure we're not running out. I prefaced my presentation saying that we do work with tissue sampling, right? So tissue sampling, a lot of people are like, oh, frig, tissue sampling, right? Big deal. It's, why would you do that? Things like that. So in the past, people have been very reactive with tissue sampling. You see an issue in a field, you call your agronomist or your seed salesman, whoever, and you say, what the hell's wrong with that soybean plant? There's interveinal chlorosis. Is it mag? Is it manganese? What's going on? So you take a tissue sampling. Okay, we're low in manganese. Well, what we've sort of done over the last 3 or 4 years is that approach has kind of changed. We're doing a lot more proactive tissue samples. We're doing a lot of work with some independent consultants, some agronomy companies like PT Sullivan Agro, working with a lot of the ag retailers that are trying to add value to their customers by seeing what's in the plant. We all spend a lot of money on fertility, right? We throw all this fertilizer at the crop. We have soil reserves, right? We all get our soil samples, which is where it all starts from. You need soil samples to see what your base fertility is. The problem though is there's so many chemical reactions, biological processes in the soil, nutrient interactions that just because we have a high level of, say, magnesium in the soil does not mean it's getting into the plant. And we have really seen that this year, right, Mike? You've looked at a lot of samples yourself. We've actually seen a lot of high potassium levels in a lot of crops this year. And this isn't Eastern Ontario, this is across Ontario and various crops, but we've been doing a good job getting our potassium levels up, right? Everybody is told to spread 200 pounds of potash if your levels are, 100 ppm or base saturation's 2%, whatever. So we've been building potassium levels up. The problem is, these are all cations, calcium, potassium, magnesium, ammonium. They all fight for a chance to join the party essentially, right, at the exchange sites in the soil so they can be made available to get into the plant. If we have too many potassium cations, magnesium is a very poor competitor, we've learned, compared to potassium. That will just displace or block the magnesium cations and they won't get in. So we can use tissue samples to make sort of smarter in-season crop recommendations for sure. But what we've actually started to do more of is help growers plan for next year and start to see what's not getting in and how we may want to change even our granular approach for next year. Our company is more on the foliar fertilizer side, but we do a lot of work with growers and retailers on how they can change some of their soil amendments or granular packages as well. The other thing about our tissue sampling platform is that's different. We use a web-based. It's all on the internet. We send samples in, do the extractions, get the samples up. We've built basically all these crop models with algorithms using artificial intelligence. And I keep saying this, but we've been using AI since long before ChatGPT and long before AI was cool. We've been working on using AI to help us with all these nutrient interactions to come up with optimal nutrient levels for various crops in different areas at different growth stages. So when you get these pinwheels back, green would be optimal, red would be suboptimal. Those values are all created based on actual yield data we've gathered from sampled areas. So how it works is when we're building models, We get data, whether it's from yield monitors, weigh wagons, hand harvesting. We've done work with seed companies that do intensive characteristic trials, and they'll send us, they tissue sample every site, and they send us all their hand harvested data. That all goes into these algorithms to spit out, 250 bushel corn had 70 parts per million manganese at R1, right? And that becomes, those top 10% of the fields becomes that optimal level. So our values are changing every year. It's very sort of state-of-the-art and forward-thinking. Most other labs are using ideal or critical levels from like the 1960s, right? Like what we needed for manganese for 100 bushel corn in 1970 is a lot different than what we need for 265 bushel corn today. Just to summarize, we're living in a world of biologicals, right? And I'm so sick of hearing that word. Our company works with a lot of different biomolecules. I mentioned we're a nutrition company. We sell nutrients, right? Well, we've also done a lot of work adding in different biomolecules with crop nutrition, right? To try to bring about ways to mitigate stress, right? So, we need manganese, we need zinc, put some manganese and zinc on, but then if we can add like some amino acids or some enzymes into the manganese and zinc, we can supplement the plant so that it uses its energy more efficiently. So this is the best way to think of the world of biologicals and what everybody, the $6+ billion that's going to get invested here in the next couple of years, they're all trying to do the same thing. You got a soybean plant, right? This is the best way it was explained to me. You're putting on all these little pin beans, right? We're starting to grow these pods. We're also, with soybeans, we're still putting on leaves, right? There's a lot of energy required for all this, nutrients. Well, then we hit 6 inches of rain. We have all of this reactive oxygen species created, right? So the plant only has so much energy. So that now it's making amino acids and forming these proteins and all these things. Now it's got to basically take some of that energy and fight the reactive oxygen species, right? The idea of biologicals is, in my opinion, is supplementing the plant with things that it's probably already making so that the plant can just spend its energy on going to that pod or putting that leaf out and not having to fight all this damage from stress, right? So we're basically, it's resource allocation and nutrient use efficiency is what we're trying to achieve by adding any of these biologicals someone's going to try to sell you in the next year.